Welcome back, my friends. Grab a glass of sweet tea, sit on down, and let's talk about this case. I'm your host, Josie, and today we're diving into another intriguing story. So get comfortable and let's get started. Y'all, I have finally started my Christmas shopping. I did only get a few things so far, but hey, it's still a start, right? I swear, this year has just kind of flown by. I feel like the year just started. Like, how are we already in the middle of October? You know what I mean? Ooh, but Halloween is even closer. Only a couple more weeks. Now, my oldest says that she don't want to dress up this year, which is definitely a first for us. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that just yet. You know, I want them to stay babies. All right, y'all. I do want to get more feedback from y'all. Tell me what parts you're liking, what parts you're not loving. I want the good, bad, and the ugly. You can always drop a comment or shoot me an email, which will be at the end of the episode as normal. I do plan to get a social media account started soon. I'm trying to get a few more episodes under my belt before I jump into that aspect of it. Tell me what you think about that. Give me some ideas on it. Alright, let me get myself in gear and get this party started. Today's case is in Louisiana. Look, I had to practice saying it correctly because I get to talking and I say Louisiana. Louisiana. So if y'all hear that, just roll with it. Now, y'all don't be getting mad at me if I say some of these names wrong or pronounce something wrong. I did search them and try to get the correct pronunciation. But some of them gave me a run for my money, let me tell you. And some of them have multiple ways of saying them. So just grin and bear it with me, honey. So, as I've been doing, I'm just going to give y'all a little tidbit of information on the state that we're talking out of, okay? Where the case originated. So, Louisiana is unique for their legal system being based on French and Spanish civil law, not common law. They use parishes instead of counties. It is the home to the world's longest bridge over water, which is Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. Louisiana has the highest alligator population in the U.S. Not surprising. Them jokers will eat you. The official state drink of Louisiana is milk. The culture is distinctive, and it is a distinctive blend of French, Spanish, African, and Native American influences. Y'all, I don't know if y'all have been to Louisiana. It is such a cool place. Everywhere you look, it's just unique. There are some of the best people you will meet are there. They are the most kind-hearted people you'll ever meet. But anywho, all right, folks, let's hop on into our case today. Today we're talking about Derrick Todd Lee, aka the Baton Rouge Serial Killer. He was a serial killer and rapist. Between 1998 and 2003, Derrick murdered at least 7 women around Baton Rouge and Lafayette, Louisiana. Derrick Lee was born November the 5th, 1968 in St. Francisville, Louisiana. He was the second child of Florence Lee and Samuel Ruth. Let me give you a little background on Derrick's family in his earlier years of life. Samuel, the dad, abandoned the family during Lee's childhood to get back with the wife that he had been separated from. It's said that Samuel had several mental health issues such as depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. Samuel had a record of domestic violence, but even more so, he was arrested in 1991 for the attempted manslaughter of his second ex-wife after he aimed an empty gun at her and repeatedly pulled the trigger. So, keep all that in mind. Florence, Derrick Lee's mama, was 17 years old at the time of Lee's birth and did not list Samuel as the father on the birth certificate. She raised her 2 children along with her husband Coleman Barrow, who she married later. She was described as short-tempered and domineering. Ooh, yikes. So Derrick grew up mostly with his mama side of the family who lived nearby. He was known to be a restless child and hyperactive. Derrick did have a close relationship with his uncle, grandfather, and his cousins. So let's go forward to about 9 years old. When he was about 9, he had acquired a strange interest in watching other people. Yeah, you heard that right. Watching other people, kind of lurking around, peeping. Sometimes he'd freak out the other nearby residents with the way he would be extremely still and not move an inch while he was watching folks. Tell me that ain't creepy. He had been caught several times peeping at his cousins and his sister through windows. Now, in his early teen years, he would. Let me back up a little bit. Let me get myself straight. Derrick was a bedwetter until his early teen years, and he sucked his thumb until high school. So clearly, he did have some unresolved issues happening there. He had a low IQ and was in special education classes and speech therapy. He reportedly felt embarrassed for being in special ed, and he was regularly bullied in school. In 1987, so we going up a little ways. In 1987, he and his girlfriend Jackie Sims moved to Zachary, Louisiana, and he became a pipe fitter. Over the next 15 years, he held several different jobs, all within like the related job fields, but he would have long, extended periods of time of unemployment. Derrick and Jackie got married in 1988, and they had their first child, a son, who was born at the end of 1988. This is when he and his wife started having issues, kind of growing distant. He started staying away from home for multiple days at a time. Yeah, that would not fly with me, sis. Derrick started frequenting like bars, going to barbecue restaurants, and Bible studies. Odd mixture, but that's what he was doing. And he would go there and pick up women to take them and have sex with them. In February 1990, Lee twisted Jackie's arm during an argument and threw her out of the house. So she filed a restraining order against him. Okay. Then in November 1992, Derrick and Jackie had a second child, a daughter. So clearly she had forgiven him and they got back together. Okay. Turns out he didn't change any. Shocker. He abandoned the family shortly after the daughter's birth. And then in early 1993, after Jackie prepared to file a case against Derrick for criminal neglect of his family, he returned and made like a brief attempt at reconciliation for a few months. But he just went right on back to physically abusing her and up to his same old antics in June of the same year. Not long after that, he was put in jail for burglary, and he would not maintain contact with Jackie or the children for over 2 years. 2 years, y'all. Jackie had found out about Derrick's affairs through rumors, but she didn't confront Lee about it. She had later stated that she had quit caring and went on with her life. So basically, she was like, he can live his life, I'll live mine. I do want to note that she was unaware of the later murders. So not long after Lee got out of prison in 1996, Jackie's father died in an accident at work during an explosion at an Amoco plant. Jackie ended up getting a $250,000 settlement. So, of course, he came sniffing back around. Lee took the money and started spending, honey. He bought expensive cars, clothes, jewelry, and alcohol at different bars to impress multiple women. He used some of the money to buy a house and 1 acre south of St. Francisville. And then he gambled away over $5,000 at a casino. That man was something else, let me tell you. And then in 1997, he met a woman named Cassandra Green, and they carried on like a stable affair over the years. Lee had his third child with Green, so with his mistress, in July of 1999. Interesting. By November of 2002, Derrick and Jackie had filed for bankruptcy after going $85,000 in debt. Well, that is not very surprising with his spending habits. Okay, so let's talk about Lee's prior criminal history for a minute, because this is all going to kind of start playing together. And y'all excuse the sinus mess I got going on. So, Lee's first arrest was November 8th, 1981, at age 13 for breaking into a candy shop. He was convicted of simple burglary, let me say that right, and sentenced to probation and to pay restitution. At age 16, he was arrested for attempted second-degree murder for using a knife during a fight with another teen, who was left uninjured. But the case ended up not going to court. February of 86, a relative of Lee reported him to police for reportedly peeping through the windows of his home as well as female relatives' homes. This joker was creepy. In September 88, he was convicted for unauthorized entry of an inhabited dwelling. May of 90, Derrick got into a fight with his father-in-law, which led to an arrest for disturbing the peace. That same year, Lee was questioned by police after neighbors overheard an argument where Lee accused his mother of owing him money. Lee's sister filed a complaint against him due to an incident in which he had removed a glass pane from her window to unlock her front door after being forbidden from coming inside. Baby, that's when you pull out that 12 gauge. We ain't playing with that. In 1992, Lee was arrested in Zachary after he was found inside the locked home of a man with 2 daughters. In 93, a pair of 15-year-olds were slashed with a bladed object while at one of Zachary's cemeteries, with Lee later being identified as the likely assailant from the description of one of the victims. In July of 93, Lee was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor at East Baton Rouge Parish Prison for simple burglary. He paroled in July of 95 and moved to Lake Charles, where he was arrested 2 months later on a peeping Tom offense. Ooh, shocker there. He was given a 120-day prison sentence, which was suspended and replaced with 2 years of unsupervised probation. 3 weeks after that decision, Lee was arrested alongside a cousin and their friend for stealing clothes from the Salvation Army donation boxes. The initial charges were burglary and theft, but the charges were downgraded to misdemeanors. Dang. In July of 97, in Zachary, a woman called police over a man prowling and peeping around her house. Lee was arrested at a cemetery where one of the arresting officers recognized him from an earlier incident where he was given a ride by police when his car was found broke down outside the same cemetery grounds. What is this man's obsession with damn cemeteries? How odd. In 1999, Derrick started stalking 36-year-old Colette Walker after seeing Walker at her place of employment at a seafood market. June 21st, Walker was approached by Lee in a parking lot near her home in St. Francisville. Lee asked Walker out twice for a date. Then he asked her if she could give him a ride, but she declined it all. I guess he didn't want to take no for an answer. Y'all, please remember, no means no. Plain and simple. 2 days later, Lee followed Walker into her apartment and refused to leave until she gave him her phone number. So she eventually gave him a number, but it was a fake one, just to get him to leave. Walker said that while Lee was not openly hostile, he was insistent on meeting her again and nonchalant while he was touching all her stuff in her house. That's a good way to lose a hand, bud. July 3rd, 2002, Lee sexually harassed a woman he had followed through Breaux Bridge, Louisiana. Lee had tried to pull the victim toward him by the arm while he masturbated under his clothes. So that just goes to show you this guy had a plethora of criminal offenses and continued to walk around with the rest of civilization. He never learned his lesson. Like, no matter how many times this man got in trouble, he just picked it right back up. That is a wild criminal history right there. Now we're going to get into his murders. The night of April 18th or 19th of 98, 28-year-old Randy Jane Muber disappeared from her home in Zachary. Lee had stalked her several times in the past. That night, Lee, who had been laid off from his latest job 2 days prior, left Liz's lounge after an argument with his girlfriend. He drove down Highway 964 and went to Randy's home. He broke into her bedroom and attacked her. The attack caused severe bleeding. After incapacitating her, Lee dragged Randy to the driveway and raped her. Her body was never found. Her keys and a pair of 5-pound dumbbells also disappeared. Her disappearance was reported by her ex-husband, Michael, who had arrived from Mississippi the following morning to pick up their 3-year-old son, who had slept through the entire event. Michael was the prime suspect since he had a history of alcoholism, frequent fighting with his partners, and a death threat he had made against another ex-wife. Michael's girlfriend provided an alibi for the night, and he was released due to lack of evidence. He did end up getting custody of his son, but the police did continue to keep him under like an informal watch for years. Then there was Gina Wilson Green. On September 23rd of 2001, 41-year-old Gina Wilson Green was strangled to death in her home on Baton Rouge Stanford Avenue. Green had complained about feeling unsafe, and so she placed cans of pepper spray at each window. She had been raped and undressed in the kitchen and placed on her bed after being killed. Green's cell phone was found several weeks later in a trash can at a nearby alley. Interesting. Because the murder had occurred near Louisiana State University, students and staff were being much more vigilant and on high alert, as they should be. Green's murder was counted among a number of other killings recorded in and around Baton Rouge, but it had not yet been linked to Randy's case. Not at that point. Green's ex-husband was questioned as a suspect, as well as a painter who had previously issued threats against Green due to a financial dispute. Lord of mercy. And then there was Geraldine Barr DeSoto. On the morning of January 14th of 2002, 21-year-old Geraldine DeSoto was fatally stabbed in her house in Addis. Lee, who had been fired from another job 4 days earlier, had asked DeSoto to let him in so he could use a phone, which he used to bludgeon DeSoto in the head from behind. DeSoto was able to flee to the bedroom and get to her husband's shotgun, but it wasn't loaded. He ended up catching up to her. He wrestled the gun from her, and she ran for the back door before being repeatedly stabbed in the back and chest with a hunting knife after Lee caught up to her. She died from a slit throat. Lee stomped on her body before leaving the scene. DeSoto's body was found by her husband, who was, at first, he was held as a suspect. He had inadvertently tampered with the crime scene by getting blood on his clothes, touching the shotgun, and punching a hole in the wall out of frustration. Because he had believed that DeSoto had committed suicide before he saw the stab wounds on DeSoto's body. After that, we had Charlotte Murray Pace. On May 31st of 2002, 21-year-old Charlotte Murray Pace was fatally stabbed on Baton Rouge Charlotte Avenue. Pace had graduated Louisiana State University a week earlier as the institution's youngest MBA recipient and relocated to her new home 2 days earlier. While her 2 roommates were away, Pace was attacked by Lee, who raped and killed her by stabbing her 81 times with a screwdriver after a long struggle. The murder of Pace and Gina Green were linked by police since they lived close to each other before Pace's move, and they jogged at the same park near LSU. So I'm guessing he stalked both of them because they were so close to each other. Okay, then on July 9th of 2002, 46-year-old Diane Alexander was attacked in her house in Breaux Bridge. Lee had knocked on Alexander's door, claiming to be doing construction for a made-up neighbor and family, and he had came over and asked if she could help him find their address. Alexander did not let Lee inside, but handed him a cordless phone and a phone book to use on the entry of the porch through the half open door. While he was outside, Lee engaged in small talk while repeatedly asking, like, where's your husband? Alexander eventually confirmed her husband wasn't home. So when she went to get some items from inside the house, Lee forced his way in and began choking her, brandishing a knife in his pocket. After forcing Alexander onto the living room floor, Lee set aside his knife and started playing with himself. Alexander was able to briefly grab a hold of the knife, but Lee wrestled it out of her hands. Lee used the knife to cut an electrical cord, and he wrapped it around Alexander's throat as he attempted to rape her. Because Lee couldn't achieve an erection, he proceeded to repeatedly beat Alexander instead, striking her in the face and stomping her in the stomach. Good grief, this man has problems. At this point, Alexander's adult son, Herman, walked into the home. And he was, alerted by his mom's shout for help. And it did end up causing Lee to relent, and he ran. He fled through the back of the house towards his car. He did take his knife, the cord, and Alexander's purse with him. Before losing consciousness from blood loss, Alexander was able to call emergency services while her son tried to unsuccessfully follow Lee's car in his own vehicle. Diane Alexander is the only known survivor of one of Lee's murder attempts. She spent 2 days in a coma before being released after 5 days of treatment at Lafayette General Medical Center for a hairline fracture, lacerations to her face, and bruising to her back. Alexander's son immediately provided police with the details of Lee's car, which was a gold-colored Mitsubishi Mirage with noticeable frontal damage. On May 22nd of 2003, Alexander provided a description of Lee to the FBI, and they brought a sketch artist in and did a sketch. And then we have Pam Kennemore. July 12th of 2002, 44-year-old Pamela Kennemore was murdered after being abducted from her home on Baton Rouge's Briarwood Place, shortly after returning from an antique shop in Denham Springs. Lee entered through the unlocked front door and kidnapped Kennemore as she was sitting in the bath. After being beaten and tied up, Kennemore was driven to the Whiskey Bay, where she was raped before having her throat slit, nearly beheading her. Her body was mutilated beyond recognition, so her husband identified her from a gold earring. How heartbreaking. A silver toe ring had been taken from her body by Lee, who then gifted it to his wife. 2 motorists had spotted Kennemore as she was being driven around in Lee's truck after she had made eye contact with them briefly while she was conscious. A woman on the airline highway recorded the license plate while a truck driver on Interstate 10 reported the sighting via CB radio. A sperm sample was recovered from Kennemore's body, but was too insufficient for a full DNA panel. And then we have Danae Colum. On November 21st of 2002, 23-year-old Trinicia Danae Colum was murdered after being abducted from her home in Lafayette. Colum was the only known victim to hail from outside of the larger Baton Rouge area. Her car and belongings were found near a cemetery. Colum was fatally bludgeoned after being raped. Colum's body was found 3 days later by a hunter in a forest near Scott, Louisiana. Heartbreaking. Then there was Carrie Yoder. March 3rd of 2003, 23-year-old Carrie Lynn Yoder was murdered after being abducted from her home on Baton Rouge's Dotson Avenue. Yoder was raped and beaten before she was strangled to death. Her body was found at the Whiskey Bay 10 days after her disappearance. Y'all, these poor women. He was a fucking monster. I find it interesting that he had different methods with each murder. A lot of the serial killers stick to, the same methods every time. But the similarities, there were some similarities, and that did include the removal of cell phones from the victim's belongings and a lack of any visible signs of forced entry into the location where the victim was attacked. Yes, because he was so sneaky, is what it was. He didn't have to break in or force entry because he was lying to him, pretending he was somebody he wasn't. I did find that Lee used the name Anthony when talking to victims, and he was typically very well dressed. Police originally believed that the killer was white, and that was the result of an inaccurate FBI profile that was done and inaccurate eyewitness accounts. So the authorities issued thousands of DNA tests to Caucasian men in and around the general area of the murders. But since they didn't have any leads, police allowed the now defunct company, DNA Print Genomics, to access DNA left at the crime scenes. DNA Print Genomics generated an ancestry profile indicating that the suspect was 85% African. So that did change the trajectory of the investigation. Police then knew that they were searching for an African American man for the January 2002 murder of Geraldine DeSoto after DNA evidence was found under DeSoto's fingernails. So she did get a piece of him. And good for her. With the DNA evidence gathered from the victims, a psychological profile, and the police sketch from Alexander's description, the police were able to go public with the information. So once they did that, authorities in Zachary recognized the man from a recent Peep and Tom incident that they had investigated. So the police in Zachary called the police in Baton Rouge to let them know the name of the suspected perpetrator. They did also let the Baton Rouge Police Department know that they had a DNA sample from Lee due to a prior murder investigation from 6 to 8 months earlier. So, of course, when the lab ran the DNA and compared the samples, they were a match to Derrick Lee. So at that point, the manhunt was on. And then the America's Most Wanted host, John Walsh, added Lee to his top 10 fugitives of 2002 at number 3. So, this dude was serious. Like, he had major problems. He took so many lives, and it's so heartbreaking. And he put them through hell. Lee had already fled the state on May 10th after police got Lee to submit a voluntary DNA sample. He did take his children out of school before ordering them and his wife to go to Detroit for a while. Lee hopped on a bus and he traveled through Michigan, Illinois, and Georgia. On May 27th, after a 5-day manhunt, law enforcement found him hiding in a motel in Atlanta. Of course he was hiding, like a coward. Authorities had 2 failed arrest attempts, one at a homeless shelter and another at a motel, but he was finally apprehended in Atlanta's Polar Rock neighborhood. Lee waived extradition and he was returned to Baton Rouge on 5 murder charges. On top of these 7 confirmed murders, Lee is also suspected in the murders of a 41-year-old Connie Lynn Warner in August of 92, a 23-year-old Christine Moore in May of 2002, and the disappearance of 65-year-old Mary Ann Fowler in December of 2002. Eugene Boisfontaine was initially also investigated for Lee's involvement due to the proximity of the murder of Gina Green, but DNA evidence did not match his in 2005. August of 2004, Lee was tried for the murder of Geraldine DeSoto. Lee was eligible for first-degree murder charges, but the district attorney prosecuted Lee for murder in the second degree because DeSoto had not been sexually assaulted, which meant a first-degree murder conviction would have been harder to obtain. Lee was convicted by jury and sentenced to life without parole. Some people believed that Derrick Lee was incompetent to stand trial, but some believed that he wasn't, so they decided to do a psychiatric evaluation. He scored an average of 65 on standardized IQ test. Typically, a score below 69 is considered to be the threshold for an intellectual disability. However, Lee was deemed fit to stand trial despite the low IQ. October 14th of 2004, Lee was convicted for the rape and murder of LSU graduate student Charlotte Murray Pace. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. On January 16th of 2008, the state Supreme Court upheld the murder conviction and death sentence. Lee was placed on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. January the 21st of 2016, Lee died from heart disease after he was put in the care of Lane Memorial Hospital in Zachary a few days earlier. So 2016 was the end of that horrific man. Phew, okay. So here's a little notation. Diane Alexander believes she deserved the $100,000 reward for providing the description of Lee that led to his arrest. But the Lafayette Crime Stoppers told her that she was not eligible to receive the award, which is so shitty, in my opinion. Poor lady was attacked and traumatized, and they wouldn't even give her the award for helping capture the dude. So on February 22nd of 2006, Alexander hired an attorney to pursue the case. The Crime Stoppers claimed the reward expired August 1st of 2003. And that even though Alexander had gone to the police, she didn't contact the Crime Stoppers before the deadline. The Lafayette Crime Stoppers won the case. And quite frankly, they should be ashamed of themselves. Here's a little interesting tidbit. On November 21st of 2018, Lee's son Derrick, at age 19, was arrested for negligent homicide for accidentally shooting 16-year-old Valentine Brooks in Jackson, Louisiana. In June of 19, Derrick was convicted of negligent homicide principal to attempted robbery and obstruction of justice. He was released from jail August 2nd, 2 months later. I just felt like that was a little interesting piece of information for y'all. It was suspected that Lee was responsible for other unsolved murders in the area, but the police lacked the DNA evidence that they would need to prove the connections. However, after Lee's arrest, it was discovered that another serial killer, Sean Vincent Gillis, was operating in the Baton Rouge area during the same time as Lee. And of course, that might be a case that we have to dive into another time. Friends, it has been an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. I did enjoy discussing this wild case, even though that man makes me sick to my stomach. But let me just go get my behind in bed so that I'm able to function tomorrow. As always, thank you for joining me on this episode of Sweet Tea and Crime. I hope you enjoyed our dive into today's case. Do you have a case that you'd like for us to talk about? Feel free to email it to sweetteaandcrime1, that's the number 1, @gmail.com, or throw it in my comments. Don't forget to grab another glass of sweet tea and join me next time for more intriguing stories. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring. I'm your host, Josie. Be good and stay safe.